Well, good afternoon, my friends. Welcome to the second session of Florida Libraries Online, Fostering Resilient Communities, the virtual conference. My name is Raymond Neal, and I'm the Continuing Education Coordinator for Nephlin. This session is part of our Friends and Support Groups track, brought to you by Nephlin. As you can probably tell on the screen, today's session here is Creating a More Resilient Budget through Community Engagement, as presented by John Chrastka. There will be time at the end of the presentation for your questions and comments. You can type them in the chat box as we go along, but we may not be able to review them until John gets to the end of his presentation. Please use that chat box to interact with us and leave your microphones muted. You will receive an email shortly after today's conference containing a link to a brief survey on your experiences with the conference. Please complete that survey. It gives us guidance on developing events for Florida Library staff and makes an impact on our funding for the future. You will also receive a link to a copy of a recording of this session. Now a little bit on John Chrastka. He's a founder and executive director of EveryLibrary, the first super PAC for libraries, and the EveryLibrary Institute, a public policy and tax policy think tank for libraries. Since 2012, EveryLibrary has provided pro bono support to 104 library communities with ballot measures and tax referendum, helping win over $325 million in stable tax funding. He's a former board president of the Berwyn, Illinois Public Library and RAILS, the Reaching Across Illinois Libraries system. Prior to EveryLibrary, he was a partner in Associate Direct, an association consultancy, and was director for membership development at ALA. He was recognized by Library Journal in 2014 as a mover and shaker. Well, folks, let's welcome John Chrastka for today's second breakout session presentation.
Raymond, thanks very much for the introduction and to the Nephlin leadership team for helping to sponsor this particular session. Folks, I'm interested in spending some time with you today to talk about ways to interact perhaps more effectively with people during what is right now a very fraught time, and interact with them in ways that help build relationships that'll help carry your library forward from disaster into just regular everyday crisis that we're going to be in for a little while, I hope. Well, I mean, not that I hope that we're in crisis for a while, but the disaster has been enough. EveryLibrary, very briefly, again, a political action committee for libraries. We're a 501c4 organization, which is very different than a 501c3. We work on politics, and the politics side of it is when we talk to the voters, when we talk to elected officials. The politics side of things is about decision days. In fact, we work really on one day a year as an organization. It might be election day. It might be the day that the county commission, the city council, the town board, or a school board as well. We do have a good profile on school library activities, the day that they make a decision. It's also the day that a decision is made at a state level or even nationally in Congress. We have a good international partnership going also with the United Kingdom Library Association, the UK Library Association. It's been very interesting to learn how to talk to Parliament. And all of my PBS watching as a kid is starting to pay off finally. All the work that we do, by the way, is pro bono and for free to the libraries. And I want to mention that from the beginning, because as you're listening to this conversation today and thinking through some of your questions and challenges, I want you to feel like you can reach out. We're not here to charge the library or the Friends Group or the foundation, or if there's a ballot measure happening in a community, that local Vote Yes committee. Though sometimes we've also had Vote No committees, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We're here to do it for free and pro bono. We're donor supported as an organization, individual donors around the country, companies, largely within the library space. So as we're talking today, I want to think through a little bit about engagement in ways that might be a little bit more engaging than we're currently doing. And it is a difficult time to break through the noise. I'll give you that right now. But there's also real important opportunities for us to start thinking through how do we reach people today who might need the place, might need the stuff that we've got, might need the services that we're offering, might need the downloads that are happening at a higher rate than ever before, but it's also a very important time for us to be engaging with other human beings who are perhaps concerned with where things are going in town, who are perhaps compassionately engaged with the same populations that we care about, and who have a hope for a more interesting place to live, a more thriving place to live, and a more prosperous place to live. Folks, we are at a singular moment where we need to start rethinking and taking a page from politics about how people are wired to listen to ideals. Not ideas necessarily, but ideals. The value system that's in somebody's heart, their heads. Where is my head at? Our guts. In our guts, what are we doing? Well, can we do it better? Let me suggest here that we need to reframe, rethink, re-engage how we have been doing work on community engagement and on advocacy for a generation. We tend in library land to tell stories about other people more than we talk about, well, what we're doing. And if you're in a friends group or a foundation, if you're on library staff, if you're on the board for your library, whose story are we telling? Folks out in the world are looking for solutions to big problems in society. And are we abstractly, well, putting somebody else up in front rather than saying, I have done this work, we are doing this work? We tend to use the wrong vocabulary in our engagement conversations, in our advocacy, in our storytelling. We only seem to have one noun in libraries. It's library. The library did this, the library did that. When in fact, we need a few more nouns. We need a few more nouns about the librarians and the library workers and the staff, a few more nouns about the volunteers and the donors and the board members who make it all possible. We need a few more pronouns, because you can't say the library feels. You have to say I feel, or we need, or you, all you all out in our community are. Right now, we have trouble with our engagement moments hitting and landing and sticking with somebody and bringing them in with what engagement is truly about, because we only have one verb for them to engage with, which is read. And there's a lot more verbs out there that we need to be exploring. There's verbs about, well, download now, access. We also have verbs like donate. We have verbs like volunteer. We have verbs like network. We need to broaden our palette, our vocabulary. And if we're in a literacy-based business, we should have been doing this for the last 25 or 30 years, but it's time for us to catch up to it. The work that we're doing to tell better stories needs to be full sentences with a noun and a verb and a direct object that's more variable than just literacy. I also want to mention that we're in a period now where some communities are going to be experiencing some version of budget austerity, where the budget's going to get cut, not because you've done anything wrong, but because there's less money available in the world. And I'm worried about Florida the same way I'm worried about Illinois, my home state, and Berwyn, Illinois, my hometown. Sales tax, use tax, entertainment tax, hotel tax, gasoline tax, well, pretty much everything is taking a current hit. And in a current hit, well, push comes to shove in austerity in two different ways. One is that everybody takes a haircut, and two, the numbers people take over. And if all we have are stories that are engaging about soft things, we need to remember that there's a whole group of other humans who are in a position of decision-making who numbers tell the story to. But let me give you the secret weapon about talking to folks who are more statistically minded. I'm going to tell you about my father-in-law, Ed. Okay, he knows I'm telling you the story. Don't worry. Ed is a baseball guy. Ed's a softball guy. In fact, Ed is in the National 16-inch Softball Hall of Fame here in what's the name? Forest Park, Illinois, just over the way. He's an umpire, and before he retired, he was an accountant. This man calls balls and strikes for fun, and he's an accountant. He's up until 2 o'clock in the morning watching ESPN, even now when there's nothing on. He's up until 2 o'clock in the morning. Back in the day, what would you do when he woke up the next morning is he'd go to the grocery store and buy the Chicago Sun-Times and open up to the sports page, and he checks the box scores. He checks the box scores to make sure he didn't miss anything, and the numbers tell a story for him. But then, folks, you got to remember about these numbers, guys. What they do is that they turn the page. They stay up and watch ESPN, not just for the games, but for the storytelling behind who the team is. Maybe the star player's on a streak. Maybe the coach is trying to do a big turnaround plan. Maybe there's a slump. I'm not a sports guy myself, but the translation points here for a person like my father-in-law, when 2005 was the best year of his life because the Chicago White Sox won the World Series and his first grandchild was born in that order, I need to be able to unpack what the numbers are for my library budget, what the goals are for my fundraising, where the impacts have been, the projected the projected impacts and the projected shortfalls if we don't have the budget, and then talk about the I and the we, trying to operationalize that. Who's the team? Who's behind the numbers? But his entry point at this very critical time in our country, your state and your town, is through the numbers. People donate, volunteer, and vote, not for rational reasons. People donate, they volunteer, and they vote not for their experience personally, but based on a value system and a set of beliefs that they have. People donate, volunteer, and vote. They become engaged with what we're doing, our mission, vision, and values, because, and folks, this is me here telling you personally, I've been donating to Greenpeace for 15 years, $15 a month. I just looked at it the other day. I was like, oh my God, I've been doing that forever. I've never once in my life felt like getting in a dinghy and going out to the North Sea. I've never once felt like getting in a small Zodiac boat and putting my own body between what I think is important, which is whales and dolphins and such, and the harpoon. I've cut them a check every month based on what they've told me they've done, and the belief I have, the hope that I have, the value system I have that they're operationalizing for me. And yet, a lot of the people that we know, our first line of engagement, are coming in to use the library also for what they want or need. So it's easier sometimes to talk about the utility of what we're going to buy with the money, the action that we're going to perform as a volunteer, the stuff that the librarians and the library staff are trying to do right now to pivot from in-person only to digital only back to something hybrid. Their use patterns are very different than their belief systems. And I want to give you some information about that in order for you to start thinking through how you reframe a call to action about either donations or public money or volunteering or networking, all those different verbs. They're all based in a shared value system. The same way it is for a political party. I mean, in some cases, it's regardless of who the candidate is, it's about the party. It's all based in a shared value system because we have some, either hope or compassion or pride, fear or concern. Here's the value system of the American public about libraries, generally speaking. This comes from Pew Research Center's 2016, it's their Libraries 2016 study. It's fascinating. I would love to know how your library, generally speaking, bumps up against it. I'm nervous for libraries that are going to be closed longer because they should be closed longer. Don't get me wrong. I live in a very hot zone right here in Berwyn, Illinois. Both of my parents got the COVID. They're fine now. I spent a month in mask and gloves personally, and I'd like to make sure that our colleagues around library land have the PPE they need and good procedures in place. And a lot of what we have as value system in our communities is based on location. That said, this list of what people value, not for themselves. There's no return on investment here. This is a values system. This is a deeply held set of beliefs. It's a safe place for people. It creates opportunities for people. The library is a trusted place for new technologies. Folks, I don't need that myself. John, hi, nice to see you. I don't need that myself. My family can walk across the digital divide on the devices that my children have lost or broken. We're fine. But what about those other people? What about those other folks down the way? And yet, in the same study, Pew shows us that people's behaviors and usages of the library are about, what they're good. You got the good stuff there. Borrowing books, reading and studying, watching, sitting, getting some help, attending some stuff, visiting some stuff. I'm going to go up one more. I'm going to go back. This is about the noble work. This is about the transformational activity. And yet people themselves are saying, oh, it's cool, I'm fine. In fact, I want you to take one more look at this. This is from a study out of the UK called the Freckle Project. It was a survey. There was one version of it that was done in the UK, and there was one version that was done in the US. This is the US data. They found, by asking the question, what was the last book you read? And what was the reason for reading it? Almost 70% of Americans said, I was reading it for fun. And yet a lot of our marketing, a lot of our messaging is about the nobility of reading and literacy. It's a very heavy word. Yes, it's mission aligned, but there's got to be a disconnect somewhere that we have to be careful about when it's mission aligned to say it's about literacy, but most people are like, I'd like the next tea koozie mystery. Okay, this is where the rubber hits the road. And I'm giving you this background information so you can start thinking about your own town and how people are a little bit wired around the value system. This is the American sample. Again, it's Pew 2016. I know it's a couple years old. Not much has drifted. This is the background radiation where public libraries live. When this came out, though, I got to tell you, most people in the library industry, advocacy space, freaked out. I didn't. I thought this was brilliant. When asking an average American if they close the local public library, would it hurt you, your family, or your community more? 66% of Americans say that closing the local public library would have a major negative impact on the community. Another 25% say it would have a minor negative impact on the community. I don't know who these 6% are that are horrible people who think it won't matter at all. But generally speaking, 66% of Americans think that there would be a major impact, there but for the grace of God go I level of impact on the community. And yet for their own selves, their families, the people they love the most, it's only 33% who say it would be a major negative impact. There's another 33% who are like, yeah, it might affect me somewhat. A full third of Americans are like, I'm cool, don't worry about me. But they really, truly worry about the other. I'm not freaking out about this because when this came out, everybody said, oh my God, it's only 33% of people who think that it's a major impact on themselves or their families, the people they love the most. We need to get more people into our library. If they only saw the place, they'd love it. But this doesn't really matter. There's a wellspring of compassion here. There's a depth of compassion. There is a lot of hope in this that says, well, I think that the library does these noble things. I'd really love to hear about the people who run the library and do the work, though, because all they're saying about is library. I haven't heard about the staff. I haven't heard about the library workers. There's a depth of compassion. There's a depth of engagement. There's an understanding that something is bigger than just what I need personally. So if all you're doing is saying in your marketing, your outreach, your fundraising to the person who might be a donor, might be a voter, might be a constituent of your elected officials, if your only engagement point is about, well, use, i.e., if we get this money, you will get. If we get this money, there'll be more classes about bridging the digital divide. That's very abstract. That's kind of a feature, in fact. Do I need that personally? No. So why would I care? The messaging and the engagement points need to be translated into what that particular class about the digital divide is going to do for somebody other than the person who's listening to you exclusively. You can put up a flyer that says 10 a.m. Tuesday, digital divide class. But then on Wednesday, you need to say to the rest of the community, hey, yesterday we had a digital divide class where 10 people showed up, and it was an amazing opportunity to help change those people's lives. If you believe, like we do every day here, the we of it, that this should be done, vote for us, donate for us, support us in some way, shape, or form. There's a value system that's being realized by the work that's being done, and your budget drives that value system's ability to be enacted. All right, we shift gears slightly away from Pew. This is to OCLC. The OCLC From Awareness to Funding study. They've done two of these, 2008 and 2018. This is from the 2008. It's the quote, direct quote from their 2008, but it still holds through as late as 2018. That the willingness to support library funding is not driven by or limited by the user status of the individual who's voting a constituent of your elected officials. And if you get into the data more on From Awareness to Funding, it's a fascinating study. Both of them, I totally recommend reading it. But read it in the morning. You don't want to do it right before bed because there's some stuff in here that makes you a little nervous. That said, the user status of the voter, the constituent of an elected official, a volunteer, a donor, somebody who's engaged in the community is not driven by or limited by their use. This country is littered with libraries named after families that are too rich to use the place. Libraries are filled with books that have book plates on, Mary Smith donated it. You haven't seen Mary Smith except for once a year when she brings you a check. The user status of these people who are supporters is not relevant. So if all we're doing is saying in our engagement points, our marketing, our outreach, etc., that there's going to be more use opportunities, or if we require them to become a user before they become a supporter, we will have disconnected it for them in a dramatic way. Our marketing and our messaging and our engagement points, if they're about convincing people, if the goal and aim of your friend's organization is to bring in more people for the virtue of bringing in more people, rather than the value system being expressed around literacy, around early childhood, around support for people looking for work in this time of crisis, in the fabric of Main Street, if the value systems around connections across, well, digital divides, but also between people, about community identity, as opposed to the mechanics of circ stats or digital downloads. What people believe, like I've said, in the background radiation is a big influencer on how they engage. And people believe different issues of importance. For a lot of folks inside library land, it's reading, it's literacy, it's little kids. And in a lot of communities, it's about a more interesting place to live, or a more thriving place to live, or a more prosperous place to live. So your engagement points need to be broader than simply the ones that we're familiar with and comfortable with around literacy and reading and little kids, and need to start broadening because your library's got a mission right now that helps solve COVID-related problems. There are 4 stories that I'd like us to consider telling more effectively. One story is about success. It's a personal story. It has a pronoun that says I or we. We meaning all y'all who work there, the big team of the board and the friends and the foundation. Here's a story of our success that demonstrates and emphasizes our values. We worked on literacy services. We did a great job. We helped a whole bunch of people. Here are the stats, and let me tell you about the team. That success means that we're worth investing in more. It's the front page of the annual report. It's the donor letter, unless, of course, the donor letter needs to tell a more truthful story, perhaps, about failure. And a story that says, we have identified some sort of a failure, either within our organization or within our community, that we want to fix because we have the integrity to do it. We are worthy of your money investment, your tax dollar investment, your volunteer time, your donor money, your philanthropy, because we have the integrity and the experience, but the integrity to do it. Telling those 2 stories first, when you're looking to engage new people in the library's success, in the future of the library, those 2 stories are much more important than the third one, which is stories about people who are important to you, like, Johnny, particularly, who learned how to read. We tend to tell the story that is about somebody else, when in fact, the only reason to invest is to say, I am going to get in that dinghy and go out to the North Atlantic and put my body between the whales or the dolphins or whatever and the harpoon. Now let me tell you about that work. We succeeded this time. We failed that time. Instead of just talking about whales or dolphins. The 4th story in your engagement is the why you do what you do. Because people are also interested in interesting people. I've been a volunteer in my friend's organization for X number of years. I've been on the board for my foundation for Y number of years. I love being a librarian. I love my library job. I love being a library worker. Yeah, there are challenges and there are joys. Why do you do what you do? Makes you a very attractive person to hang out with. I'm going to get back to why that's important in a second. Okay. Let's translate these insights into how it translates to support. There are four kinds of supporters for any issue that's out there. There are four stories to tell. These are four kinds of supporters. This is different. To shift your frame slightly, we're talking about groups of humans here. The inner circle of any group of supporters is always a relational group of people. In politics, it's the party members. You're a card-carrying member of the Democrat Party or the Republican Party or the Tea Party or the whatever party. You know librarians yourself. You're an insider. You know the people who work there and volunteer there. You know the people who are on the board. You have a relationship, not with reading, but with the human beings. You identify yourself. The next ring out are supporters who are ideologically driven for an issue. They agree that the whales should be, saved. They agree that literacy services should be provided for free, and that digital divides should be bridged by librarians, and that there's a workforce development component and an economic development component, and there's a community connection component. And thank goodness we were able to pivot as fast as we did around digital, because that means that people should be able to get access. They're ideologically aligned. They're not in a relationship, though. They drive by, they see the parking lot's full, they may or may not use the place, and they think everything's fine. There's another kind of supporter for any political action, any ideology, any sort of like ideals-based, and the library certainly is ideals-based, mission-driven organization. There are version supporters. They're the people who, when they hear about the cut to the library, they're like, why are we doing another dumb thing in town? We've had too many dumb things happen in town. Why are we being dumb? Why are we being stupid? Why are we being fools? They tend to be the people who show up in crisis because they are perhaps against a politician who's cutting your budget. They are not necessarily going to be there for the long term, but they're like, why are we having trouble? We shouldn't have trouble. This is simple. Let's take care of each other. Let's put a small amount of smart money to work. And when we're not doing it, then we'll show up as supporters. There's another group of people who are in politics. They're called access supporters. Those are the people who pay like $10,000 a plate dinners to go see, to go visit with Mr. Trump or Ms. Clinton. They're the people who come to like big foundation or friends events to meet Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson because they're speaking. There's a lot fewer of those in library land than there is in politics. But I want to go through these different types of supporters with the next set of slides in mind, because every one of these different supporters is wired to listen to you about the library and the work of the librarians, the mission, vision, and values of your organization, and how your friends group or your foundation supports that in different ways. Marketing is about getting people to use the place. Engagement is about how do we activate the value systems and connect the dots even for folks based on what they believe. The stuff that we need to get funded, whether it's in the tax base or from donors or from grants or philanthropy, tends to be very feature oriented because it has to be. There's a form follows function problem here. It has to be features. Like if you don't have enough staff, you don't have enough hours. If you don't have enough collections and digital downloads and licenses and databases, you can't do the work. And your job as a library leader or as a supporter, inside supporter, is to make sure that there's enough of those features in place. And yet they're not the thing that activates someone as a voter, a donor, a volunteer. Yes, users benefit from it, but the organizational mission, vision, and values is expressed through those features. And what engages people is, well, what are your expected and hoped for outcomes? And more importantly, there's a bunch of aversion supporters who are nervous about what happens if you don't have the funding to do it. The relational supporters, the ideological supporters, want to see about outcomes. The aversion supporters are folks who are like, let's not screw it up this time. Things are precarious enough already. Why are we going to pull the rug out from under the one functioning part of our society, our library? We have to talk about the values that are shared across our community. We've talked about the value system that's inherent in some of these people. And I'm talking about the statistically minded here also. What are your hours truly? Your hours are discovery and refuge. It also benefits the rest of the business community because people leave their homes, they come to the library, then they go shopping. People leave their homes, they go shopping, they come to the library to reward their children. Collections and circ stats are about problem solving for people rather than just collections and circ stats. All of these different areas are around how do we operationalize and realize our mission, our vision, and our shared values. Engagement goes very, very smoothly when you're talking to not just the heart, not just the head, and not just to somebody's gut, but all three. And part of talking to them about their heart, their head, and their gut, their disposition, is to be honest with them about what happens if you do not have the resources. What happens when you don't, when you can't, is just as important in these engagement conversations as what are your aspirations in plan A. Every single community that we've ever worked in on a ballot measure, and was over 110 right now, every single community that we've ever done a negotiation with, successfully or unsuccessfully, the first question is always a where's my money going to go question. And that's the stats people who ask it first. But then the next question that's not always answered, that does need to be answered, goes back to the earliest slides in this presentation about who is spending the money. How, the pronouns and the nouns and the verbs. All right, from an engagement point of view, I don't know your community. I possibly have been there. I might have vacationed. My apologies. We're one of those Chicago families that comes down to Florida every so often. I got a particular soft spot for St. Augustine and the St. Augustine Beach area, but I've been around a little bit. I don't know your town. But there are three ways to talk to people in your town. To be engaged with them is to ask yourself first, who else cares and how do they care? Do they care with compassion? Do they care with compassion? Do they care with pride? That's different. Let me tell you about compassion first, though. Populations are who we have compassion for. Those kids who are learning how to read, those people looking for work, those folks who are otherwise isolated or in moments of transition or crisis. Who else cares about those same populations is the umbrella in which you engage those either organizations or those individuals as partners or as donors or volunteers or voters or constituents. Because the compassion conversation is limited, though, we need to be very willing to talk about the pride of place. I've never been to your hometown, my apologies, or maybe I have, and again, my apologies, because I was there as a tourist, the worst kind of a Chicagoan. Do you love your town? Do you have a lot of pride in your town? Do we want to have a more interesting place to live, which means that we have better programming from our library? Do we want to have a more thriving place to live, which means we need the right kind of service points that make sure that people can read and have positive health outcomes and connections with each other? Do we want a more prosperous place where people can find their first, next, or best job because they've got both the skill set and the access to the internet, where you can take an idea from just inside your head to the marketplace and open up a business with support from the library? Compassion and pride are the two normal, everyday axes of communication about who else cares. The third one, though, is what we're all involved in now, and not just during hurricane season. It's concern, maybe it's fear. What are the priorities in our community during a time of financial or health-related crises? What are the priorities, and how does the library, well, if all you have is one note to hit, and the big concerns in the community are not about early childhood literacy right now, it's really about like trying to get back on our feet because there's no more tourists coming down from Chicago for a while. Your library is already doing magnificent and amazing and high impact things that address those concerns in your community. It might be your role as the leadership team to engage on those points that might not necessarily be the normal ones that you do every day, or the ones you would have done before March 13th or 16th or whenever that was for you. But to address the fact that there are deep concerns in the community is to tell the story of integrity about how you can do it if you've got the right resources, or the stories about your, integrity, as well as your story about competency. Okay. Right now, the big conversation point across all of politics is around negative campaigning or positive campaigning. And the tone and tenor of our country right now on the race class narrative, a lot of people look at it as a negative, and I don't think they should. It's actually a very positive place of engagement. But the nervousness within a library leadership team around whether we tell the truth or not sometimes is like, well, we don't want to appear to be going negative. Plan B doesn't look good. But plan B, if it's what we have to do, is the thing that, well, those relational supporters want to avoid, those ideological supporters are aligned against, and those aversionary supporters don't want to see happen. I'm not suggesting you go negative, folks. I'm not suggesting you stay positive. I'm suggesting you tell the truth right now, more so than ever. To tell the truth right now is the thing that distinguishes, well, when there's an elected official, there's somebody we like. When they're a politician, there's somebody we don't like. It distinguishes you between your library and the institution that is a community anchor institution. It distinguishes your friends group and your foundation from folks who do know what they're talking about or don't know what they're talking about. Telling the truth right now is the single biggest thing you can do for outcomes from your engagement that matter. It's more important than ever to do it right now because everything is, in some way, shape, or form, a moment of concern. Our compassions are highlighted right now because our value systems are being offended. Our pride of place is under threat. And yet the library, your friends organization, your foundation, the leadership team, the staff is well positioned either to competently extend with the right resources the mission and vision and values, or to fix with integrity based on the mission, vision, and values. Raymond, I'm coming around the horn here for the last two slides. I want to give everybody a heads up about chat box. We're going to have about 5 minutes or so. We're going to end promptly at 1:45. But if you have a comment, a question, a thought, concern right now, put it in there while I'm giving you the coda. I said before about how the user status of the donor, the user status of the voter, the user status of the constituent, the user status of the philanthropist doesn't matter. I said before how there are different types of folks based on their relationships or their ideology or their aversion to the things that shouldn't go badly. But fundamentally, in our points of engagement, and even with the statistically minded people or the heart people or the head people or the gut people, fundamentally, there are two groups of people when we are doing good storytelling or strong engagements about the mission, vision, and values of the community. There's two groups of people. There's library users and there's library non-users, and you gotta address them differently in order for them to actually be engaged back with you. To the library user, I highly recommend you start your discussions with the phrase, as you know, even if those people you're talking to don't know. As you know, we're doing this big donor campaign right now because, as you know, with the high school right around the corner, kids are going back in the fall. Everything's going to be different. We're going to have blended learning happening. There's going to be plenty of families that are going to need a place for their kid to go. Distance, support for social distancing is a little uneven, perhaps. As you know, with the high school right around the corner, at 3:00 back in March, this place would fill up. What's going to happen in September? We need to make sure by doing this donor engagement campaign right now, as you know, activate something in people's hearts about being part of the group and says that we are in not just a shared value system, but a shared mission. To those folks who are non-users, though, you're going to have to assess where they're at. Are they statistics people? Are they heart people? Are they head people? Are they gut people? Are they close to you, but not really a user, one way, shape, or form, you've got to begin your conversation with them with the phrase, "as you can imagine." Because they don't know anything. They haven't been in the library for a million years. They don't know it, but they can imagine it. They can imagine what a expected and hoped for set of outcomes are if you get the funding. They can imagine what the trouble is going to be if the funding doesn't happen. They can imagine unless they can't. And not to end on a negative note, but I'm going to tell you the truth here. If the people right now that you're talking to, trying to engage in the mission, vision, and values and the future of the library, say to you, "I can't imagine it," please move on. Things are too fraught right now, but keep moving. To be able to talk to the widest number of people in your community about where those value systems interact and what a community anchor institution like your library does to put them to work is the strongest thing you can be up to these days. Raymond, I appreciate it. Thanks for the time today to be part of the Nephilim community and to be part of this conference. My contact information is for you here, folks. I want to be contacted. If we can help you think through some of these big issues of the day for you, I'd love to be able to help. So I think we got 4 or 5 minutes here, Raymond. What's on people's minds?
Thanks, John. Okay, you can see there is John's contact information on the slide there. One thing that popped up in my head during this is one of the things that you run up against a lot in Florida is, people move here because we don't have a personal income tax.
Mm-hmm.
And they think anytime you talk about something involving funding, it means their taxes are going up.
Mm-hmm.
What's a good way to get around that, to get a foot in the door? Because a lot of times that just seems to bring things to a halt right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And I remember in 2018, you folks had the homestead exemption on the ballot as well, and that nearly passed. There is an alignment around politics that says to progressives that we have a shared sacrifice, to conservatives that says taxes are intended to be small but smart. And with the libertarians, unfortunately, it says that taxes are theft. And if the balance in your community is more on progressives, it should be a conversation about plan A with the caution around plan B. If your community says, if it's more conservative, it is a small amount of smart money to an agency that covers more than just a single purpose. And people hate single purpose taxes right now. And the library is the one legitimate organization and agency in the community, the one legitimate institution in the community that has a multi-purpose mission, and it operationalizes across ages and stages. And you have to do more marketing, more outreach, and more engagement about the things that you're doing besides literacy in order for people to realize that. And on the libertarian side, I would always tie a public spend to some sort of private partnership. You have to show the numbers, and you have to be able to demonstrate that you've used it to the maximum before you ask it for the next time. And those taxpayers, you owe them that anyways.
Good strategies. Janet raises the question of people are already giving to the library. Why should I give a donation here right now?
Sure. So the conversation during the COVID crisis and during this coming economic tsunami is one of first understanding that people who have funds available will give. That's up to them. People who have time will give their time if they have it to give. People who have a good name, network connectors, folks like that, will give their network if they're so motivated. That's up to them. The messaging around donation right now needs to be something to the effect of our mission and our values have not changed as an organization. Our vision for our community has not changed, but what has changed is the way that we're expressing it, either with more digital, more remote, more asynchronous, because we have to, and we need your help in order to fulfill it. If you still believe that the institution of the library and the librarians who are doing the work value, then yes, please donate now. And if you can't donate now, there's zero pressure.
Okay, thanks for that one. And John, you got any last parting thoughts? We are going to have to wrap this one up so we can get ready for the
Absolutely,
next
folks.
session.
You are in a good spot as the key stakeholders in the leadership team for your library to have these conversations about how do you broaden the engagement, not from a technique perspective. It's having a cup of coffee with somebody. It's making a telephone call. It's dropping an email. It's all the stuff of human interaction that are the techniques. I don't need to teach you technique. Just be a person about it. But to talk to each other about where the messaging around mission, vision, and values aligns with those different types of supporters, and to be bold about the vocabulary that you use. I did this, we did that. We, for the all y'all out there in our community, need these resources either to remain stable or to be extended. Happy to help. Raymond, as I said before, here's my email, here's my phone number. Give me a shout, we do it all pro bono. We do it all for free. There's not a single toolkit available for this. If anybody tells you that there's an advocacy toolkit for you, they know what they're talking about. It's got to be about your town and your place. And I'm happy to help. I'm happy to meet you. Raymond, thanks so much.
All right, thank you, John, and thanks everybody for coming by today. Don't forget, we have yet another session coming up in today's extravaganza of information. This one's going to be funding your library, collaborating with friends groups and foundations with Pat Wagner, who's another one of our frequently used trainers. And I'll give you a link to get into that one right there. Actually, that one just went to John, so there we go. So if you want to follow that link, that will take you to sign up for the next